Welcome to the 11th episode of Fergo and the Freak. I'm that bloke from Rugby League Project, Andrew Ferguson. You can find me on Twitter at AndrewRLP, and joining me as usual is the League Freak, who you can find on Twitter at League Freak. How is the newest inductee into the Rugby League Commentators Hall of Fame today?
Oh, very good. Apparently it went really well. I got some really good feedback from it. And then I put up a poll on my Twitter page, and everyone said that I was worse than Braithen Astor. So that was a real body blow. And I don't know why I ended up with a bunch of people that are pricks following me. But I don't like any of yous. So there you go.
I did vote for something other than Braithen Astor.
What, ears bleeding?
I don't think anyone deserves that sort of condemnation that early in their career.
I was devastated. I got four options, and people were just overwhelmingly the last two. I was like, geez, what did I do wrong?
You left the door open is what you did.
Yeah, so I've just done what every other basically high-profile radio commentator does, and I've just completely dismissed the public. So I'm well on my way.
That's right. You need to complain about the refs more, mate. That was your problem.
Yeah, just whinge. I haven't got quite my 100% whinging phase going, so I'll get there eventually. And then I move into bullying.
That's a natural progression.
Yeah, it'd be great.
Now, in today's episode, we've had a few requests about some of this stuff, so we figured we're going to dive in and have a look in salary cap cheating. This is going to be pretty extensive, obviously, so we might just dive straight on in. What do you reckon?
Yeah, let's get stuck in. I can't wait to see who has broken the salary cap and who are the complete clean skins in the game. So let's find out.
Alrighty. Well, the salary cap was introduced in 1990. It was around about 1.4 million, I think, from memory at that time. And it only took 1 year before we had the first salary cap breach, and that was by the Canberra Raiders. And all we know is that they had substantially breached the $1.5 million salary cap for the year. They didn't have their premiership taken off them in 1990. They didn't lose any premiership points. They did have a penalty put on their salary cap for the following 1 or 2 years, I believe. But that was the first big cap breach, which compared to, I guess, what happened with the Storm, it seems like the Raiders got off pretty lightly there.
Yeah, definitely. And it sounds very much like rugby league administrators, that they'd bring in a salary cap, and then when someone breaks it, they don't really know what they're going to do. Like, what do we do now?
That's pretty accurate. Right, well, from there, obviously, the salary cap slightly increased, but then Super League came along, and the salary cap pretty much got deleted as clubs were just starting to spend stupid money on players. And I think it was it 1998? There was no salary cap really in place for clubs, and they had about a year or two to sort of get their stuff in order again. Is that right?
Yeah, from memory, they had basically a goal that they wanted to get to with the salary cap, and there were even, I think, towards 2000, there were teams where they had notional salary values for certain players, and I think maybe what they were including were loyalty payments that players had from, say, the ARL to stick with the ARL, and obviously they were on massive amounts of money. But these players wouldn't be able to play for any club under the salary cap, so they gave them a notional value. And it was normally the notional value to stick with their current club. And so the salary cap basically during the Super League War and a little bit after it was non-existent, but working towards a salary cap after the Super League War.
Ah, right. Well, that would explain why in the year 2000, practically half the competition got pinged with fines for breaching the salary cap. So I'll start with Newcastle Knights were fined $158,800 after club officials revealed they'd exceeded the cap by $454,100 and failed to disclose third-party payments during 1998 and 1999. Also, the Warriors were fined $100,000 for failing to disclose third-party payments in 98 and 99. 6 other clubs were fined: Penrith $80,000, Canterbury $50,000. Parramatta 40, Melbourne 24,300, the Roosters 12,800, and Cronulla 6,900. And later on in the 2000 season, the Storm were pinged for another 89,900 after it was found they'd exceeded the cap by $177,000 during the year. The Broncos were also fined 84,000 for exceeding the cap by 118 grand and were late lodging documents relating to financial and contract details for 10 players during that year.
Wow. Well, at least, they as they were trying to get the salary cap under control, and all these clubs started getting fined, and they learned their lesson from this point on, right?
That's exactly right.
Mm.
Because
that was a great episode.
I was going to say, because none of those teams got fined in 2001, only the Cowboys did.
Oh, there you go.
They didn't learn the lesson of the other clubs, so they got hit with 100 grand for exceeding the cap by 210,000, and that was again over failing to disclose third-party payments.
Yeah.
Then 2002, the Bulldogs were fined a maximum of $500,000 and deducted all 37 premiership points that they'd earned that year, after it was found that they committed serious and systematic breaches of the salary cap. It was described by then NRL CEO David Gallop as exceptional in both its size and its deliberate and ongoing nature. The breach totaled $2.13 million over 3 years, so it was 460 grand in 2000, 750 grand in 2001, and 920 grand in 2002.
Yeah. And the crazy thing was when it happened too, because they had an incredible season up until that point, and it was like their entire season hit this amazing crescendo, and then the axe come down on them, and it had all sorts of ramifications. I mean, we all remember the Oasis project that they had going in the background, and they were going to build themselves an indoor stadium, I think in Liverpool somewhere, and it had so many effects on the club, absolutely smashed them. So that's since 1991, because obviously 1990, sorry, with the Raiders. The Bulldogs one is the second big cap breach, and one that you'd think that teams would have learned from.
Yeah, especially given that this one was the first time, I dare say, a club was trying to be sneaky with the salary cap. I don't think the Raiders were. I think the Raiders were just a bit sort of flagrant / a bit obvious with it, I guess. But this one by the by the Bulldogs was quite sneaky in what it was doing, which is why they got hit so hard.
Yeah, and the thing was too that they tried to fix it up too, and look, to their credit, they did to a certain extent, because they tried to keep their squad together, and they did manage to, because they won a premiership 2 years later. And you can say, like, if you look at it that way, it was worth it. But when you look at the damage to the club's reputation, the way that the media turned on them at that point, the way the opposition fans turned on them at that point, and the damage that was done off the field especially, I don't think it was worth it, even for a premiership.
No, and that's the thing we find too, is that the media and the fans have very long memories when it comes to this sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Also in 2002, for minor fines, the Roosters, the Knights, Melbourne, the Tigers, and the Broncos all copped fines ranging between 149,000 and as low as 57,000. So they were all for mostly third-party agreement breaches as well.
I'm glad that third-party agreements were cleaned up back then too, so we don't have those issues these days.
Yeah, which is why the following year they all kept breaching them again. So the Storm again. I think it was 3 years in a row at this stage. They were fined for exceeding the cap, this time by 25 grand. So not big biscuits. There were 7 other clubs that were fined in 2003 after a massive crackdown by the NRL after the Canterbury scandal that happened the year before. So Penrith, Newcastle, Brisbane, South, the Warriors, the Bulldogs, and the Sharks all copped fines between $60,000 and $10,000. So they weren't huge breaches.
Not too bad, yeah. And you can see where you have technicalities in that you might sign a young player on a a deal where if they play a certain number of first grade games, you've got to up their salary, and you might have so many injuries you have to play them, or you might get a young player that you say, look, if you end up playing rep football, we'll give you an upgraded salary, and then for some reason they just explode out of nowhere and end up playing rep footy. And so there's some of the lower end salary cap breaches you can understand, but it's the ones that are egregious that are the real problem, and that the league is looking to stamp out.
Yeah. In 2004, we're starting to see a bit of a trend here. I wonder what it leads to. The Melbourne Storm were again fined for the third year in a row, fourth year in 5 seasons.
Mm-hmm.
This time it was 120 grand after club officials revealed that their former management had failed to disclose third-party payments made between 2001 and 2004.
That's interesting. Their former management. So, yeah, well, it wasn't the Storm's fault. Hopefully the current management at that time then knew not to break the salary cap.
Yeah, you'd think they'd learned from that one.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, the theme here is just so heavy.
In a cruel twist, the Bulldogs were fined $82,300 after club officials revealed that they'd fallen below the salary floor by $160,000 and were late in lodging documents relating to financial and contract details of a player from 2003 and 2004. So they've gone from being massively over to massively under, and they got pinged again.
Yeah.
Damned if you do, damned if you don't.
The funny thing is the NRL had to bring in salary cap rules so that there was a floor on what you had to spend. Because as the salary cap was going up and the grant was going up with it, they were starting to get to a point where they were worried that teams were just going to underspend. And the difference between the grant and how much they were actually spending on players, they were just going to pocket into the club. So they had to put a low level that you had to spend on players. And that's still in effect today.
It does make sense. Does make sense because you don't want clubs, abusing the system, I guess, to prop up the leagues club or whatever else.
Yeah, exactly.
So what else do we have there? 4 other clubs were fined in 2004: the Dragons, Penrith, the Roosters, and Canberra, and they were between $32,000 and $5,000. So they were all pretty small,
very low. Yeah,
almost makes you wonder why they bother.
In
2005. The Warriors were fined $430,000 and were ordered to start the season in 2006 with a 4 premiership point deficit. They also had to cut their payroll by $450,000 after club officials revealed their former management exceeded the cap by $1.1 million during the previous 2 seasons.
Wow, so that's the next biggest salary cap issue. So so far we've had the Raiders, and then the Bulldogs, and now it's the Warriors. And I think this is one that people forget all about, the Warriors one.
Yeah, and I think it's because they didn't have anything to take off them because it was found in the off-season.
Yeah.
So they couldn't... It was hard to determine how much to punish them, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have a title to take off them. Not that was the thing that was happening at the time, but they didn't have any competition points either. So it's a bit of a tricky one. It turned out to be just the right amount of premiership points because the Warriors just missed out on the top 8 that year.
Wow, so there you go. I mean, it's almost the perfect penalty then.
Almost. 4 other clubs were also fined for breaches in 2005. These ones ranged between 20 grand and 6.5 grand, and that was the Dragons, Newcastle, Canterbury, and Canberra again.
So once again, smaller breaches and probably on technical grounds, you would think.
Yes, because I think this is around the time too, or it might be a little bit after, they brought in their loyalty contract thing as well for players who had been at the club for a long period of time or through juniors and stuff. They got some sort of loyalty discount.
Mm-hmm.
And sub clubs were, I think, a bit unsure as to how to apply it.
Yeah.
And I know that the Tigers in future years, when I get to it, were they got done because they tried to claim it for Robbie Farah.
Mm-hmm.
But I think one of the junior clubs he played for, the NRL deemed it wasn't a West Tigers junior club. There's some weird thing like that.
Yeah.
I think a lot of these are coming about when there's minor tweaks to the way the cap worked because they're not huge fines. 2006, the Raiders were fined $173 grand after they exceeded the cap by $286,000 and incorrectly lodged documents about 12 players during the 2005 season. 7 other clubs were fined that year: Melbourne, Dragons, Broncos, Souths, Tigers, Newcastle, and the Sharks. 2007, 6 clubs were pinged for minor breaches. That was Souths, Tigers, Canberra, Canterbury, Melbourne, Brisbane. Melbourne seems to be coming up on here a lot.
Yeah, and it's 2007, a minor breach against the Storm. Interesting.
And 2006.
Ah, yes.
In 2008, 5 clubs, again, minor breaches. These ones were between 15 grand and 3.5 grand. Dragons, Souths, Titans, Bulldogs, and the Tigers. In 2009, 7 clubs were fined for minor breaches. The Storm again, Brisbane, Canterbury, Tigers, Penrith, Roosters, and the Titans. Then we get to 2010. Officials from the Storm revealed that the club had committed serious and systematic breaches of the salary cap between 2006 and 2010. By running a well-organised dual contract and bookkeeping system, they concealed from the NRL a total of $3.78 million in payments made to players outside of the cap, including $303,000 in 2006, $459,000 in 2007, $957,000 in 2008, $1.021 million in 2009, and $1.04 million in 2010.
Wow, unbelievable. Go on, sorry.
I was going to say, as a result, they were stripped of the 2007 and 2009 premierships, the 2006 to 2008 minor premierships, the 2010 World Club Challenge Trophy, and fined a record $1.689 million. $1.1 million in NRL prize money was equally distributed between the remaining 15 NRL clubs. 89 grand in prize money from the World Club Challenge was given to the Leeds Rhinos, and the maximum of $500,000 was fine was handed to the club for breaching the salary cap regulations. They were also ordered to cut their payroll by $1.0125 million, reduce to 0 competition points for 2010. It was cheating on a scale that had never been seen before, and to this day, it's become the benchmark.
Definitely.
Almost to the point where people now use this as what should be the standard response to salary cap cheating, which is, in my opinion, a little bit wrong.
Okay. So, and the weird thing about it too was that I consider this to be the moment that Melbourne turned from a franchise into a club, because they got absolutely hammered, and I remember the media storm around it, and so to speak, and it was almost like it was the moment that Storm fans and the wider Melbourne public, and I know that they're not the most popular team in Melbourne, sporting team in Melbourne, but it was like all of a sudden everyone was like, hey, they're messing with our Storm. Like, they've smashed our Storm club. They've taken away our premierships. And I really do. I feel like that was the moment that made the club in a funny way. Also, you got to look back and think they had been self-reporting these small salary cap breaches. The balls on the Storm to be going to the NRL and saying, look, we've breached the cap by a little bit, when they were breaching their cap by hundreds of thousands and then $1 million+. The balls on them to be putting those small cap breaches forward. Unbelievable when you think about it that way.
It was crafty.
Yeah.
It was really, it's almost like they're saying, we're being honest, you don't need to look at what we're doing.
Yeah.
Because we're self-reporting the fact that we've breached the contract, and we're sorry about that. And this one, as we know, it was a whistleblower who revealed this one as well.
Mm-hmm.
It was insane. So in the end, the club's CEO, Brian Waldron, financial officers Matt Hanson, Paul Greco, Cameron Vale were all suspended for life from the NRL.
Mm-hmm.
This one involved legal actions by former directors against the club. All of that collapsed and didn't go anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
The matter was referred to ASIC, the ATO, the Victorian State Revenue Office, and the Victorian Police. The amount of, let's be honest, it was fraud that was going on. That's why the police is involved.
Mm.
It's just on a scale you just couldn't believe.
Yeah, incredible. And boat, like, talk about boats and I remember there was talk about getting like vouchers or something from an electrical store that I won't name unless they want to pay us sponsorship money. And it was it really was unbelievable. And also the thing to remember at the time was everybody had looked at the Storm as this great club. It was the new millennium's great club for rugby league, and they were churning out all these young players, and their lineup was outstanding. And the idea was that the players were taking less money to stay there, and they just had everything working in the right direction. The other thing is they were part owned by News Limited.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I think they were completely owned by News Limited
I
at the
think they
time.
were, yeah.
Yeah, and News Limited owned half of the NRL at the time. So this was terribly embarrassing for News Limited. And I think that I genuinely think that they were disgusted when they found out what was happening because it was the very last thing they needed.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, because it was so big in scale, I don't think anyone, journalists, commentators, even people in the public, understood how you would punish that.
Mm.
And there was still mixed reactions over the punishments handed down.
Mm-hmm.
I can see both sides of the argument with the stripping of the premierships.
Mm-hmm.
It was an illegal side, so yes, they didn't deserve to have the titles.
Mm-hmm.
The only problem I have with taking the premierships away is that, in my view, that punishes the players and the fans, and not the people who actually committed the act, which was the administrators. But as I said, it's a 50-50 thing. I'm not leaning one way or the other, but that's the problem I have with that, because the players don't dictate what goes on with, salaries and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And
And I think it was unfair to the criticism the players copped because a lot of people they they were saying, well, the players must have known, and I remember the players at the time saying, look, we don't know what each other is earning. Like, it's not like they sit around talking about, because that would cause friction in a locker room if you started doing that.
that's right.
They might have a general idea, and in some circumstances they might know for sure because they want to earn. They deserve to be the top earner at a club, but it's not like what everyone is earning, and they're there to play football. They're not there to do the sums on the salary cap.
That's right. They've hired football players, not accountants.
Yeah.
And they're not going to sit there and know what everyone's on. That's none of their individual business. So, even with the argument, they should have known something was wrong when they were signing 2 contracts. Again, that's not the player's responsibility. That is an administration debacle.
Yep.
And if you're a player, knowing that you've only got 15 years maximum of a career there, you're going to take what's offered to you. And if you're of the impression that the club can afford it, then you're not going to say no. It's because you've got 15 years to earn, essentially, for a lot of these players, your lifetime salary.
Yeah.
You're going to take what's going to be thrown at you.
Exactly. And the boat. And the big screen TV.
That's exactly right. And the extensions to the house.
Yeah. Yeah.
God knows what ourselves.
Yeah.
And the electricity vouchers, all those light bulbs.
Just standard.
It's just standard, absolutely. So there were 5 other clubs that were fined in 2010. I bet they might have been cracking themselves a bit after what happened to the Storm.
Oh, yeah.
But thankfully they weren't big ones. So Parramatta, the Dragons, the Broncos, the Roosters, and Canberra. Canberra got a $1,800 fine that year.
Wow. I wonder what their breach was. Like,
I dare say it might have been someone in the second tier who may have played like 3 minutes in first grade.
Yeah. Well, they did a training run when they weren't supposed to or something.
Pretty much about it. In 2011, the Tigers were fined $187,000 after they'd exceeded the cap by $374,300 in 2010.
Wow, that's a fair whack.
That was a fair whack. They were pretty lucky not to have any other punishments. And they still made the finals in 2010 and 2011. Last time they were in the finals, actually. The Titans, Parramatta, Raiders, and the Dragons also fined for cap breaches during 2010. The Titans were also fined for losing documents relating to the financial and contract details of one or two Toyota Cup players, I believe.
Well, you just lose stuff, don't you?
Yeah.
Like, where would you keep it? At the club?
In a bag somewhere. Steady. Okay. 2012, 4 clubs were fined for minor breaches: Parramatta, Titans, Penrith, and the Raiders. At the end of the 2014 season, the Dragons were fined $87,000. Also, the Titans were fined $300,000 after an investigation into the club found quite a lot of, I suppose, mismanagement was going on at the time. 2015, Parramatta were fined a total of $465,000 for breaching the salary cap in the 2014 season.
Yeah, and we've heard Parramatta again and again recently for a lot of these cap breaches. So it's like they built up for something special.
Yeah. It just astounds me that clubs would still be making these attempts to try and cheat the cap after what had happened to the Storm.
Yeah, it really is, isn't it? It's like you would think that they were put on notice, and they just weren't. It's very strange.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know, it's, as I said, you just think they'd learn from it. But anyway, after copping that $465,000 fine in 2015, they decided to double down, I guess. In 2016, they were fined $1 million and stripped of their 2016 NRL Auckland Knights title, which would have hurt. After they were found to be over the salary cap by over $500,000, they were also stripped of 12 competition points they'd earned that year, and they were not allowed to earn any more points until they fell back under the cap and were compliant.
It's an interesting penalty. Didn't have a premiership to strip from them, so that's one thing to consider. Not playing for competition points until you're under the cap, I don't know how I feel about that, because you get to a certain position by being over the cap, and I don't know that getting under the cap by a certain point just clears the way for you and everything's okay from that point on. I feel like once you've broken it for a season, that should be it. But that's my point of view.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that, because essentially the squad that you build, that you take into the NRL, the 17 or 18 key players that you're relying on there week to week, you could probably keep them all together and just dish off a bunch of bloody 19-year-olds just to do enough to get you back under the cap. Yeah. And therefore, the team hasn't really lost much.
Exactly.
So it is a bit of a dicey one. I do like what they did in 2018 with Manly, which we'll get to in a sec. In 2017, Canterbury was fined $61,000 after found they'd breached the cap by $81,000 during 2016. Canberra were fined $84,000 for a similar breach of the that was for a $16,000 breach of the second tier and NYC caps.
Which is just now that and at this point in the game, you've got so many contracts across so many grades, things like that are going to happen at some point. You get players that are injured, you bring in players up and down the grades. I don't think anybody really has an issue with those sort of cap breaches where it really is just very small scale.
Yeah, and I think at this stage too, most of the ones we'd seen in and around the this period and about the 10 years before were mostly second tier ones where you're bringing up players because of injuries and stuff like that, which I thought was a little bit cruel because you can't run out with 14 players or something like that. You've got to have a full side. So I always thought the NRL should have a few concessions set aside for when players have been brought up because of injury.
Yeah, and I think now that they also expanded the squad size from memory from 25 to 30, and they brought in the minimum salary as well, which I'm sure helped with a lot of those things, because then a club knew that they could have lower grade players, but then they had other players that were on a set amount, and they knew what that amount was going to be at the start of the year. Yeah,
I'd long argued and wrote about it too a few times that it was nonsense that the NRL squad size had to be 25 because I think I'd found something like the last time every team in the competition had used 25 players or less was something like in the 1950s somewhere.
Oh, wow. That's
So
incredible.
it was just nonsense trying to
Yeah.
enforce that on there when every club was going to use more than 25 players, which meant
Hmm.
you're automatically going to be putting pressure on the second tier cap.
Yeah.
So it made common sense that they put it up to 30.
Hmm.
Took too long for that common sense though. Maybe they liked the fact they were getting all this money from fines. In 2018, Manly were fined 750 grand. Two club officials received 12-month bans after the NRL found that they'd breached the salary cap over the previous 5 years. The breaches involved 15 players and totaled $1.5 million. What they did after that is they reduced the amount they could spend on the salary cap for was it 2 future years or 3 years, something like that.
Yeah, I don't
Which I
know
think is
exactly how long it was for.
I prefer
I
that
felt like it
method.
was 1 year, but I could be wrong on that.
Oh, you could be wrong. Well, I could be wrong. Who knows? We've done our research.
Yeah. At some point, something happened to them. Take it
Yeah,
from us.
but I must admit though, I kind of like the idea of giving them a handicap in the salary cap for
Yeah, so
future
do I.
seasons.
Yeah,
I think that makes more sense than docking points on the ladder or for part of the year or something like that.
yeah, definitely. It's that is a massive, massive blow to a club. Like there are clubs that would write you a check if you find them, but you can't get around how difficult it is to. I mean, you could start a season with a team salary that's $500,000 less than your opponents, and that can be huge,
Exactly.
especially over the course of the whole season.
Yes. Now, 2019, this year, we had two big salary cap breaches. We'll start with this one here because it's got less to talk about. The West Tigers were fined 750 grand after an undeclared arrangement worth around $639,000 over 4 years to Robbie Farah to be their club ambassador after he retired. This also led to the deregistration of CEO Justin Pascoe. The thing that's silly about this, I guess, is nothing was actually signed by the Tigers, so they're being pinged for intent. And I'll be honest, I have no issue with that whatsoever.
Yeah.
The other
You
silly
got
thing
to
is every
you got
club
to
does these arrangements with players for being ambassadors and stuff like that.
there's definitely a part of that. And look, I don't think anybody has too much of an issue if you have somebody as a club ambassador who actually does stuff for the club and actually, performs the role. I wouldn't even mind to see a standard thing brought in maybe by the NRL where they say, look, you can have a club ambassador and this is how much they can earn. This is the limit for however many years. The thing about this one, which is pretty amazing, is that they had an undisclosed arrangement that they disclosed publicly in the media. And that takes a special sort of club to do something like that. Absolutely, I know they're your club, but man, that's special.
Yeah, special. I think that's possibly the best way to describe it without swearing too much.
Yeah, I mean that's an IQ failure.
It was just
That's an IQ test,
so
It's
stupid.
Wow, what were they thinking?
See, and I know there's a lot of Tigers fans who disagree with me on this one, and I completely agree with Justin Pascoe being deregistered, and I don't want him back at the club because that sort of stupidity is not the sort of person I want running a football club in the future. If you can't get something like that right, you just go away. Seriously.
Yeah, there's things that we've already talked about in this list of players that, like losing documents and things like that. Yeah, it makes you wonder, like, what the hell are these people doing? Like,
Yeah.
where are you like their documents? Well, they shouldn't be just physical pieces of paper. Like, what the hell? But it's rugby league. No, some of the stories I have heard, I'm not surprised that they are physical bits of paper that are getting lost. So let's move on.
All right. Well, the other one, which I'm sure you'll have a bit more to say about, The Cronulla Sharks also copped a $750,000 salary fine for breaching the salary cap. Those breaches went back to 2013. 500,000 of that was suspended due to the club's self-reporting. It was reported that they were over the cap between 2013 and 2017, but not in 2016, and that was declared by the NRL as compliant. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, first of all, to be able to go back that far and find that there'd been stuff going on is absolutely incredible. The second thing is that for them to be cap compliant in the 1 year that they won a premiership is absolutely extraordinary. And the third thing is, how much of a advantage did they have leading into that season and coming out of that season because they were over the cap? If they'd have been stripped of their title, I wouldn't have had any problems with it, because we had seen the NRL look at clubs that had systematically abused the salary cap rules and had smashed clubs. And this seemed to be one of those instances. And I think that it is an absolute miracle that the Sharks still have their title. But here's the thing, and we're going to look at this going forward, because we've got to the end. We're in 2019.
Yep.
Some of these teams that have had major cap breaches would be the beneficiaries if there were no major cap breaches. And you've done some incredible work to look at all of this. I've done none of it. I cannot wait to hear how the seasons would look if we had changed them because of these salary cap breaches.
Yeah, so, okay, I used an interesting little system whereby the salary cap cheating side had their score in each game halved and their opponent's score was doubled.
Okay.
Right. So I managed to go through and rearrange the ladders for each year where there was a major breach that went on to determine who should have been in the finals and in the grand finals and who would have won.
So just to make it clear, right, the major breaches. So let's make it clear, first of all. The only teams that had breached the cap in any way were the Canberra Raiders, the Newcastle Knights, the New Zealand Warriors, the Melbourne Storm, the Brisbane Broncos, the Penrith Panthers, the Canterbury Bulldogs, the Parramatta Eels, the Sydney Roosters, the Cronulla Sharks, the North Queensland Cowboys, the Wests Tigers, the South Sydney Rabbitohs, the St George Illawarra Dragons, the Gold Coast Titans, and the Manly Sea Eagles. Apart from that, every other team was fine.
Yeah.
Now, the major cap breaches were by the Canberra Raiders.
Yep.
Were they the New Zealand Warriors at the time? Yeah, they were the New Zealand Warriors at the time. So the New Zealand Warriors, the Melbourne Storm, the Canterbury Bulldogs, and the Parramatta Eels. And I guess, I mean, man, I would chuck in the Sharks in that list too, personally. Would you chuck the Sharks in that list?
Well, what I've based this on was, aside from the Raiders one, because I don't know how much they were over by, but I've based this on teams who exceeded the salary cap by at least $500,000 in one season. So the Sharks probably should, but I haven't included them because they look like they had cheated the cap, but it wasn't by a ridiculous volume of money.
Okay.
Same with Manly one. But,
maybe if we got forwarded the same email, the Flanagan forward to the club, it will clear it up for us, It's
probably in my old Hotmail account somewhere.
Yeah,
I should have a look. So so I had that system, and in the finals, what I've done is I've used the ladder positions of the finalists, of the actual ladder at the time.
Yep.
And then after I readjusted them, I used the same ladder positions to determine who won. So, say, what's a good example? Say in 1 year, it was first versus second in the grand final. After I've readjusted the ladder, I've kept the grand finals between first and second.
Okay.
I kept the winners the same. Yeah. Okay. So in 1990, the year Canberra were pinged, the Knights moved from 6th place into 4th to make their first finals campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And Brisbane would have beaten Penrith in the grand final, and Canberra would have gone from minor premiers down to 14th place on the ladder.
Wow, so something interesting there. Brisbane, after just being in the competition a few years, premiers, like 1990, 2 years. That's incredible. Would I be wrong in saying Wally Lewis, premiership winner?
That's right.
Which would be
That would
massive.
change things the following year.
Yeah, definitely. Massive for his legacy. So very interesting, that one.
Absolutely. 1991, the Bulldogs go from 6th place to 3rd, and the Dragons go from 9th to 5th. The Dragons would then beat the Magpies in the playoff, and in the grand final, Penrith still wins, but instead of beating Canberra, they beat North Sydney. Canberra runs dead last. Canberra wins second last.
Okay, and we beat North Sydney. Wow.
Beat the Bears in the grand final.
Wow, can you imagine how their 80-year-old fans would be talking about that one today?
I don't think they'd be comparing it with their grand final win in 1922, that's for sure.
Probably not. That was a good year. Onions were the thing in that year.
They were in 2002, the 9th place Northern Eagles pushed Canberra out of 8th place, and in the grand final, Cronulla beats Brisbane and the Bulldogs run dead last.
Wow, 2002. That's incredible. So who's the premiers in 2002 again?
The Sharks.
That's amazing. So the Sharks actually benefit from the Cheetahs being out of there. That's amazing.
And it's the replay of the '97 Super League Grand Final, and this time they get their revenge.
Wow, that's incredible. Okay.
In 2004, there were no changes to the top 8 or the grand final, where the Bulldogs beat the Roosters. Difference was the Warriors got the spoon, not Penrith, I think it was, wasn't it?
2004? No, 2000.
South got the spoon. There was,
Yeah.
Sorry, Penrith fans.
Well, come on, man. 2004, actually, I felt like our team was better, but that Bulldogs team was very, very good.
2005, the Roosters jumped from 9th to 8th, and the Sharks drop out of the top 8. The Tigers still win their maiden title, but this time they beat the Storm instead of the Cowboys, and the Warriors run last.
Wow, far
out. In 2006, the Warriors get their 4 points back because they were punished for their breach in 2005. This was enough to see them move from 10th into 7th. The grand final saw the Dragons beat the Bulldogs, and the Storm finished last.
So the Dragons are premiers. Wow, that changes a fair few things as well.
Yeah. In 2007, the Tigers go from 9th into 8th, and Manly wins the grand final, beating the Warriors, and the Storm collect another wooden spoon.
There you go. And the Warriors in the grand final. I like that.
2008, Newcastle moves from 9th to 8th, and the grand final sees Cronulla win their second premiership, this time over Manly, and Melbourne finishes third last.
2 premierships for, man, that's incredible. And how does this change the Sharks in all that time?
2 premierships in 6 years, I mean...
That's huge. And you look at the legacy of some of the players in the Sharks teams, how that changes going forward.
Exactly. It's pretty crazy. Obviously, it's all hypothetical, but that's pretty crazy how that happens, because 2008, Cronulla, Manly, and Melbourne were all on equal competition points at the top of the ladder.
Mm-hmm.
So that's even quite a plausible situation there.
Yeah, it's not outrageous. Yeah.
2009, the Cowboys jump from 12th to 7th, and the Tigers from 9th to 8th, while Parramatta drops down to 10th place out of the finals race. This results in Manly beating the West Tigers in the grand final, as the Storm grabs their 3rd spoon in 4 years.
Wow, the West Tigers, hey? It's not a bad year for them.
No. 2010, very little change. The Raiders moved from 7th to 4th. The grand final saw the Dragons beat the Warriors, and Melbourne comes second last.
Something there. The Warriors have been in 2 grand finals in the last few years. Bit of a dynasty there.
Yeah. And 2016, next to no change. The Dogs moved from 7th to 5th, The grand final remains unchanged. Sharks win their third title, this time over Melbourne, and Parramatta remains in 14th place.
Wow, Parramatta. So yeah, and I mean Parramatta were breaking the cap to not win anything, which is brilliant.
Yeah, so after that, we found that the Sharks would have 3 titles by now instead of just 1.
Yeah, so they're basically, weirdly enough, the biggest beneficiaries. I think that you would also say that the Warriors as well. They
The
were
War- Yeah, the Warriors and the Tigers also benefit a fair bit out of it. The Tigers played in more final series. The Warriors definitely got a few more grand finals out of it too.
Incredible. So, wow, it makes you think about all of the things that have changed in the league's history in recent years just because of teams that were cheating the cap, and if they'd been really smashed by penalties, how things would be so much different. I mean, can you imagine if the Sharks right now had 3 premierships? That would be it would change the club. It would have to.
Yeah, well, I'd think that if that actually did happen, I don't think they'd have been in a situation where they would have even gone to Stephen Dank and all that crap at the start they went through. And for winner, we'd be looking at players like Paul Gallen in a completely different light, and Shane Flanagan as well, I guess.
Definitely, most definitely. I mean, it's kind of sad to think about, really, isn't it? Because let's be honest, the success that the Sharks have had has been tainted in the eyes of most people that aren't Sharks fans. And it's kind of sad to think about the club that everyone used to be behind and kind of hoped that it would one day win a title. It could have had this incredible success, and instead is, kind of where it is now, where they don't have many friends outside of their own supporters. I find that sad, personally.
Yeah, they're starting to build up a bit of a siege mentality there now, and it's understandable too, given that one of the media's biggest, should I say, muckrakers? I don't know. Is a big supporter of them. So whenever he's running a bit short on stories, he'll go there and dig up some dirt on the club and run that instead to keep himself occupied.
It's really. I don't like it when clubs do that siege mentality thing. I think that it is in the long term it's detrimental to them, and I think we're seeing that with Manly at the moment.
Exactly.
You can't keep saying, well, it's us against them, because you lose sight of just embracing new fans, I guess, and wanting, and people that are maybe undecided on who to support, deciding to pick your club. I would always want to have a club that people kind of want to support, or neutrals want to support, rather than being a hated club. And, there is something in being a hated club if you're winning lots of games, but it can't be good for your bottom line. And I find something a bit off-putting about it, and I find something sad about it, because I feel like I would rather clubs be celebrated than hated across the entire league.
And I fully agree. I think every club should be out there trying to promote themselves to be everyone's second team. Because that's a pretty good place to be as well, because you're setting a good example across the league everywhere. So yeah, I'm with you, because you can't keep winning all the time, because squads are going to change, coaches are going to change. Every club's going to go through a bad point at some point. And when those bad points come along, that siege mentality really does come back and bite you hard in the backside.
Yeah, it really does. Now, with all of this in mind, where in 2019 we've had salary cap breaches found this year by clubs, do you think that the salary cap, without saying any club in particular is breaking it, do you think that it works? Do you think that it does the job it's intended to do? And do you think that clubs are still finding ways to break it?
I think I'd probably say yes to all of that. Look, I think the salary cap is brilliant, and the problem we've got with it isn't the cap itself. It's the fact that so much of these breaches haven't been through the auditors finding them. They've been from self-reporting or whistleblowers. So I think what needs to change is the way the salary cap is audited. And I've had a crazy idea where I think every club's salary cap should be done through the NRL. So
Yeah,
the NRL has their own mob, and they just say, right,
yep.
we've got down here, this is how much money you've got in your cap. Okay, you have to send us your contracts with players that you negotiate with, and we will adjust that and adjust your cap and tell you what you got left to spend. And that way, the NRL's watching everything. If it's got to get to that level, then so be it. But something's got to happen because, yeah, as we found with Parramatta, the Sharks, the Tigers, it didn't matter what happened to the Storm and what they did there. Clubs are still trying to find a way to get around the system. And we've got to try and find a way to stop that. So I think my question back to you is, a lot of this comes back to third-party arrangements. Should they be scrapped?
See, I don't think they should be scrapped. I think it's an element that our sports stars in rugby league should have that available to them. And I have no problems where if you get a superstar player, and look, I'll pick Benji Marshall, for example, when he was at his best. I want to see Benji Marshall be able to make the most amount of money he can while he's playing at the best of his abilities. And I want to see private companies be able to go to him and say, look, we want you to be sporting our shoes. We want you to be driving our cars. We want you to be wearing our watches, whatever the case may be. And he be able to, without any problems, take up those opportunities. And I don't have any problems with that. You do get an issue where you get a club like Canberra, or Newcastle's another example, where they don't have the corporate base for that. But I think that will change with the changing landscape in the media. And you look at Kalen Ponga. I think that he could be somebody that could have a marketing campaign in Sydney or across Australia and still be a big enough star in Newcastle. And the only problem I guess you have is those players getting exposure on free-to-air TV. That's where you do run into a problem because those stars need to be on free-to-air TV regularly for that to happen. So I've got no problems with third-party agreements at all. And I think I wrote an article a number of years ago that I questioned why the NRL itself couldn't be the ones that pay the players' wages. And I can see where there would have been an issue at one point with that happening because the NRL was half owned by News Limited, and News Limited are a news organisation, and I can see where players would see that as a privacy issue.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that would be a privacy issue these days.
No.
And I can't see a reason why the NRL couldn't be the one paying the players' wages. I just can't see any reason why it'd be a bad thing. But obviously clubs want to have full control over that. I understand that as well. But at the same time, and look, they're all rugby league administrators, I don't trust rugby league administrators in general. And it's just about integrity. It's about their capacity to do the job in any effective way. I think that just when we went through that list, we saw a lot of mistakes. I think we saw a lot of teams that obviously got into bad situations that were maybe exacerbated by injuries or, players having to be called up, the smaller squad sizes and things like that. But at the end of the day, I do not blame a single player for any salary cap issue. It is all on the administrators, and they're the ones that really let the game down time and time again. And I think this is just another example of that.
Yeah, good points, mate. I was wondering whether players should sign a contract based on what the club thinks they're worth, and if they want to earn money outside that, then the player should do that themselves, and it shouldn't be done with anyone affiliated with the club they're playing with or any of their sponsors.
Well, that's how it's supposed to be.
But at the moment, you know that clubs are sitting there saying, we're going to offer you $500,000 and we can get you another $100,000 on the side doing this work with our sponsors and stuff like that, or however it works. It's some sort of weird system anyway, and there's a blurring of the lines that goes on, and I think that's where a lot of the issue comes in, is that clubs are trying to reduce the impact of players' salaries on their salary cap by topping it up with third-party arrangements elsewhere. And that's part of the problem, I guess.
Yeah, and that's, I would suggest that that's the main issue that they really have. I don't think that a normal third party agreement is the problem. I think that the real problem is, as you say, it's a club saying, we'll come here, we'll sign you for $600,000, but we've also lined up a sponsor for you. I also question some of the sponsorship deals in turn, and look, I'm not thinking of anyone in particular, but like, I don't know what car players drive. Like, I find it weird when a player has a car sponsorship deal. That seems very strange to me, that would be some sort of sponsorship deal. I completely understand when you've got a marketing campaign around it, but when there's no marketing campaign, I just kind of wonder what it's all about.
Yeah, it's we could probably laugh about some of the stuff. I mean, I remember Benji Marshall had a deal where he's advertising those weird wristband things that had a magnet in or something like that. Something to do with balance or something.
I don't even think it was a magnet. I think it was like a hologram or something.
Yeah, something weird. It's supposed to improve the balance, but it didn't stop him kicking the ball out on the floor or throwing foot passes into row E. It wasn't the best person to get to advertise those. God, it's funny how much stuff goes on there. So I suppose, would a way around the third-party arrangements issues that we've got be reduced if the salary cap was increased even further, or would players and player managers and stuff like that just see it as an opportunity to just try and jack more money out of clubs?
That's a really good question. I think there's definitely going to be less issues as the cap goes up, and I mean, these days, if you had, say, a breach of, say, $500,000, it's still a lot of money, but it's not the same percentage of the salary cap as it was in, say, 2002. So it's just a lot more money changing hands, and you do have a bigger scope to have issues crop up. And the good thing is, these days players are getting paid their true market, or closer to their true market value, where that wasn't happening in the early noughties, where players were taking massive cuts to stay in the game. Some players didn't stay in the game, some players left, and some players went over to Super League as well. So I think that these days we probably have more $1 million players than we've ever had before in the game's history, maybe outside the Super League war anyway. And so I think that you probably would see less of an issue with the third-party agreements. But then again, I mean, and this is where it comes down to, how many third-party agreements do you think most clubs really need? I mean, if you think of a club's star players, how many true star players are there at a club? But then you can also ask the question, if, an average first-grade winger, for whatever reason, can get a shoe deal, is there any reason to deny him that shoe deal because you think that a third-party agreement should just be with the star players? It's a very grey area. It's not something you can just say, well, you're only allowed 3 third-party agreements at your club, because I don't ever agree with cutting down on what a player's earning capacity could be. And it also puts in place like roadblocks. Like, what if you get a player that's maybe a middle-of-the-road first-grade player, but he's just really good at negotiating third-party agreements for himself? He shouldn't be stopped from, and it might not even just be third-party agreements. He might be setting up businesses for himself and opportunities like that. And you can't have the NRL then step in and say, well, you're not allowed to be too successful. I would hate to see that happen. So it's very much a grey area, the third-party agreement. I kind of would like it to be a free-for-all, personally, so there's no issues with it. But then you do have to crack down on clubs setting them up themselves, and I think that's one area that has not really been sorted out yet by the NRL.
Well, that leads me to one more question. That was perhaps what should happen, and this ties in with what I was saying before about the Storm there, is that the punishments should be higher for administrators who not only break the salary cap rules, but also intend to even just showing intent to try and breach the rules.
Mm-hmm.
Should the punishments be higher? And I'm talking about don't just ban them for life, have them tried by police and potentially go to jail. Something that's going to scare them out of trying to do this crap, because we're still fighting, clubs are still trying to find ways around the cap. And it's administrators, not players, that are doing it. And I think the punishment on the administrators themselves is far too weak. The clubs are
Yeah,
getting punished, the fans are getting punished, the players are getting punished, but the people who actually commit the act of cheating,
yeah.
generally they walk away with very little damage to themselves.
Yeah, see, I mean, it's only a legal matter if it's a legal matter. I mean, the police are only going to get involved if it's fraud, and we have seen cases like that where the police have got involved. And in those cases, I mean, if you're an administrator that was involved in that sort of thing, you must look in the mirror at the end of the day and think, what was I doing for a game of football, you know? Um, so I don't know that the police are going to get involved outside of it being a legal issue. But then when it comes to, and look at the life ban that they've given to Shane Flanagan. A lot of times a life ban in rugby league is really a life ban just from the top grade. And other competitions will be open to having those people come into their competition. You know, rugby league has a very long history of a ban being placed on somebody, and then everybody looks at ways to get around that ban. So, you know, I don't know how good life bans are in rugby league at the moment, although Flanagan's does genuinely seem that way at the moment anyway. The other thing I would say is, if you're an administrator at a club and you break the cap, and you knowingly break the cap, and you win the title, and you celebrate, and everyone loves you, and then it's found out later on down the track 3 years later that you broke the cap, and you've got to leave the club and maybe never go back as an administrative role for life, do you care at that point?
That's a very good question. And so I wonder if perhaps instead of going to jail, that huge chunks of these fines that clubs get should be paid by the administrators, not so much the club, unless it's been found that the club itself as a whole was involved in the cheating. But I think something needs to be done to make sure the administrators have this constant axe hanging over their head saying, don't you stuff up, because that thing's going to fall. You're going to regret it.
Yeah.
I'm big on punishments also working as deterrents. I don't know if that makes me some sort of status or something like that, but I think that there's not much point having a punishment if it doesn't try and deter the action from being done again.
Definitely, and that's where I think maybe you would. I think the thing that would hurt a club more than anything would be to either have a penalty against your salary cap. So, and we did see an instance of that with the Manly Sea Eagles, where there was a certain amount of the salary cap they just couldn't use, and that's terrible for a club to have to go through that. I would maybe like to see that extended for a certain number of seasons. I think that would be a massive deterrent, even if it meant, you know, winning a premiership and then you get found out for breaking the cap. If you've then got $500,000 less every year for 5 years to spend than everyone else, you're looking at a really, really terrible time for your club. And then you've got to question whether that's worth it. On top of fines by the NRL and administrators being forced to leave the club, I would think that would be a big enough deterrent, because you would lose star players. You would find it hard to attract players to your club for a long time. You'd find it hard to keep players that were in your lower grades, because they'd know that if they got to first grade, they're playing with a handicapped team. It would be a very, very big penalty. But then you also have to look at it from another point of view. Do you want to kill clubs for it? And I don't think you want to kill clubs for it either. So it's not as black and white as it seems. And I don't think that there's any one answer, and maybe that's why we've seen so many different sorts of penalties brought in by the NRL. I'm sure there have been times that the NRL have sat down with the club and the club have said, listen, if you fine us X amount of dollars, we need to hand back our license. And that's maybe why we've seen some of the smaller penalties being put in place against certain clubs. Because I'm sure that there are clubs that if you smash them like you did the Bulldogs or the Storm in particular, they might just fold immediately because they can't pay the fines. I don't think you'll want to get to that point either.
No, that is a very often forgotten point too, which is very good to raise. Because I'm pretty sure, obviously this needs to be verified, but I was doing match reports for the Melbourne Storm reserve grade team, New South Wales Cup team in 2010.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't have a New South Wales Cup team the following year or any year after that. They had to merge with Cronulla for 1 or 2 seasons.
Yeah.
And then they just don't have a New South Wales Cup team anymore. And I assume that that's part and parcel of the massive fine that they received from the NRL.
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of ties in with, like, if that is the case, then they haven't punished the right area when they punish the club, because they've ruined junior rugby league in the state to a degree. And
yeah, exactly.
That's not helpful. I mean, that's where your cheaper players are going to come from. That wasn't the area that needed punishing, but that's the one that got punished heavily. So that's the problem I have with these massive fines and stripping premierships from clubs. I can understand why they should be taken, and I'm not 100% opposed to it, but I just think I'm not sure that it's punishing the right people.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing we've seen too with every single one of these cases, how many of the stars that they really wanted to keep did any of them lose? And I would be willing to say none of them. They would lose lower end players. They'd lose middling players in their team, some solid players, some, good players. But their superstars, the ones they really, really wanted to keep, they kept every single one of them, every single club. And that's, as you say, the cost cutting is not made at the top end, it's made at the bottom end. And, that's part of the problem with the penalties that have been put in place. It needs to be looked at so that, and we're going to get clubs that do it in the future, because while it's just the trend now, and they're rugby league administrators at the end of the day, they're going to stuff up, they're going to make mistakes, and these are just mistakes and when I say mistakes, I mean mistakes in judgment, not so much technical mistakes. The NRL needs to look at in the future ways that they can affect a club's higher end. That might even come down to the NRL saying you need to lose, your top 2 salary players. You need to get rid of them. I don't know. But it definitely needs looked at how they handle this going forward.
Yeah, there's a lot of little things there which make up a lot of these issues, and sadly, the game isn't being played in the same spirit it once was, and that's evident off the field and on the field, because teams are always looking for ways around the rules. Like the Storm with the wrestling and the illegal holds and stuff like that. Diving, how that's become something that people do to try and get a penalty, and they're not. This is not stuff that's in the spirit of the game, and this trying to cheat behind the scenes, it's the worst kind out there, because it's not in the public eye, it's behind the scenes, and it generally doesn't get found by the NRL. It comes down when clubs have someone with a bit of morality who say this is not right, and generally that person who comes forward and says this is not right, I'm going to tell the NRL, they get hated on and get sacked out of their club and treated like they're absolute criminal because they did the right thing. I mean, you look at what happened to both Barry Andrews and Damien Irvine at the Sharks. Did so much good stuff for the club, but they're treated like absolute criminals by a lot of fans there because they did the right thing and they were honest.
And it's And I think it takes rugby league supporter bases to be a little bit smarter about the way they look at it. You know, if you've got an administrator at your club that starts self-reporting, you should support them 100% because you should want your club to have integrity. You should want your club to be one of the clubs that can hold its head high. And, you know, if your club has done something wrong, you should support owning up to it. And it's hard and it's going to put your club through a lot of pain and suffering. But the alternative is that you become a hated club. And I don't think anyone should want that for their club for any reason at all, because it's just not healthy long term for any club to get in that situation.
No, I fully agree, mate. Yeah, I tell you what, I think we've gone through that insanely thoroughly.
I've got a question for you. If you were going to break the cap, how would you break it?
I think flagrantly. Because I think so much of what happens these days is sneaky and tricky, and I think the NRL is looking for really complicated ways to break the cap.
Yeah.
So I think if you're going to do it, you do it flagrantly. Because I don't think they're looking for the obvious. I think they're looking for the really tricky. And the problem is you're going to get caught out somewhere or another. But if you're going to do it, I'd probably say, right, line up, get your major sponsor to pay some of your marquee players a payment on the side, and make it a fairly decent amount of money, or have the sponsors, I don't know, somehow tipping money into the club, and the club uses that, you know, away from sponsorship money.
Mm-hmm. See, my way would be high stakes poker. I would invite players over to my house, and I would just happen to lose all of this money every Sunday night to all my star players. Poker, you know? Oh, geez, I've got nothing again. You know, I can't believe you keep winning, Billy Slater. It's just incredible. Your luck is so good. How much have you won off there? $500,000 you've got out of my pocket playing poker. Wow, that's incredible. And just remember that.
Who knew you could get a royal flush with 2 cards?
Unbelievable.
Just, you know, Billy's playing Snap. He doesn't know what's going on.
I saw, that reminds me, I saw a picture online, and it was Kim Kardashian had been invited to a poker tournament, and she was sitting there and she had glasses on, but they were mirrored glasses. So I'd just pull a Kim Kardashian and do that. And be like, I can't believe it. It's like you know what I've got. That's how I would break the cap. The other question I have for you is, just in general, do you reckon the salary cap works?
I do.
And that's the weird thing. It works really well.
I mean, let's be honest. There's been, 12 of the 16 teams have won a premiership since 2000. And 13 of them, of the current sides, have won a premiership since the cap's been in place since 1990.
Yeah, and only back-to-back premiers that we've really had were the Broncos in the early 90s.
Yep.
The competition, I mean, even this year is ridiculously close. The worst teams in the league are showing that they can beat other teams on their day. I mean, you look at the teams now. The Roosters are playing very well. The Storm are playing very well. The Rabbitohs are playing very well. But would you be shocked to see a team come out of nowhere? And, you know, would you be shocked to see the Panthers weirdly turn it around and win the premiership? Or, you know, Parramatta go on a run and find themselves in the top 6, or the Sharks get their players back and find themselves there on grand final day? I mean, I don't think any of it is out of the question.
Yeah, there's some teams there that I think will genuinely end up being up in the top 8, I think, when finals come around, like Cronulla, Brisbane, Penrith, the Cowboys potentially.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they've got the names on paper to get the job done. But then you've got to sit there and go, right, well, who drops out of the top 8 to fit them in? And that just sort of adds to the whole argument that,
Yeah.
we're trying to fit 12 or 13 teams into 8. And
And if you look at, say, and the Bulldogs are probably, I think it's fair to say that because of the circumstances that they're in, and we've talked about that in the podcast recently, the Bulldogs probably have the least amount of talent to work with this year. But you can look through that Bulldogs side, and they've got some bloody handy players. And they're doing it on a pretty low. I mean, they would have to be really close to that low limit that you can spend on your salary cap this year.
Foreign's on 7 million, so that keeps them above it.
Yeah, well, that does help.
But yeah, look, the Bulldogs though, they do have. I mean, there are some similarities with that Panthers side in the early 2000s. They've got such a good group of young players there who could be anything, and they just need that right bit of guidance. So it's too early to tell whether Dean Pay's the right coach for that at the moment, but I'd say that I'm enjoying watching the Bulldogs play more this year than I have in the last 2 years.
Yeah, me too. And the thing that, because they started the season off looking terrible, really, really terrible. And then something just clicked with them about, a month into the season. They play so hard and they play the full 80 minutes, and they're playing teams that are better than them, just have more talent than them. But man, they don't stop trying, and they try a few different things. And I agree with you. I love watching them play this year more than I have in other seasons, especially under Desi Hasler's under sevens coaching style that he had for the Bulldogs the last few years he was there. It was like throw it to the big fella and let him run. They're fun to watch, and what type of competition do we have where even the worst team in the competition is fun to watch, and is a team that is spending less than everyone else, has less talent than everyone else, and then it's still pretty good and they'll win games? That's a pretty extraordinary thing, and I dare say that I can't think of another team, I can't think of another competition in the whole world that I know of where absolutely, any team going into a season, if they just hook it up, they could win it. And where the worst teams in the league are not that bad.
No, and that's the thing. As we're getting on, every year now seems to be getting so much closer. Last year was a bit of an anomaly because the top 8 got out to a bit of a lead over the rest of the competition, but they weren't, skill-wise, they weren't leaps and bounds ahead of everybody else. And so, it was one of the closest comps we've ever had last year. And this year's showing that it wasn't a fluke. We've got a lot of close games this year as well, and we already had a ton of bloody golden point games already. So it's pretty fascinating how the season's unfolding already. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see a lot more changes to this ladder over the years. I mean over the season. I mean, to think we've got 7 teams at the moment, all on 2 wins.
Yeah, and like you even look at last weekend's games where you had the West Tigers come into a game having just been thrashed by the Parramatta Eels. They might have an incredible comeback win against the Titans, and the Eels lose. And then you have like the Canberra Raiders, who are having a great season, lose to Manly. It's such a close competition, and tipping it is a nightmare. Tipping it is just stupid.
Yeah, I got a good story about footy tipping actually. I was in a working down here in Melbourne a few years back, and I was in a footy tipping competition, and I went into the AFL one and the NRL one, and I'd been crap for years at footy tipping. I'd argue that I still am. So this time around, I just went, you know what, I'm going to pick the entire season's tips before the season starts. Just do everything, round 1 to round 26, all in one go. And I came second in the AFL tipping, and I came third last in the NRL one.
That's hilarious.
And I used the system I used was based on ladder position from the previous year.
Wow,
and that showed you how consistent the AFL competition is and how erratic the NRL one is when it comes to results and team performances.
Wow. That's incredible.
Yeah, it was. I just went. if that's not an advertisement for how well the salary cap is and how even the NRL competition is, then I'm not here.
Wow, that's. I mean, and this episode's about salary cap cheating, and most of the episodes about how teams get around the salary cap, and yet the salary cap is there to have an even competition, talent equalisation, and stop teams spending themselves to death. And it does a pretty good job at both. So, good way to end the podcast, I reckon.
Yeah, somehow we've managed to talk about something that's not working and convince everyone that it is.
Yeah.
That's a phenomenal way to leave it.
It's just the most confusing podcast in the world. That's what we're aiming for.
Absolutely. So, just before we wrap up, just to let everyone know, we do now have a Facebook page.
Mm-hmm.
Go onto Facebook. It's Fergo and the Freak. We'll have the link in the posts. All the podcasts will be automatically updated to there. We're working on a Twitter one. I had a bit of a stuff up during the week as I was setting it up because I put in there the date of our first episode as the birth date, and apparently Twitter's not available for people who are under the age of 13 without putting in your passport.
They don't like newborns having Twitter accounts, hey? It's very strange. It's
they needed a passport, and I couldn't get a passport picture of a robot, so
they
don't accept those apparently.
I think a Twitter account for a newborn would be pretty good. Like, what would they tweet about? Oh, geez, when my umbilical cord come out, it's really itchy today.
Yeah.
It's late. Things got weird. I'm sorry.
What's this warm stuff coming out of my backside? and just for the next 18 months is happened again.
Yeah.
Happened again.
Yeah, I've had another accident. Jeez.
And then once they turn one, it's what's this taste like?
Oh,
shouldn't have eaten that.
Oh no. Oh.
What's this taste like? Shouldn't have eaten that. And 2 years after that, I don't want to eat that. I don't want to eat that.
And then they become football players and they're like, oh yeah, this hotel will do.
What happens if I put my dick in there?
Yeah. Oh, is that a shoe?
Let's tape it and find out.
Yeah. Wow, this went off the rails.
we have a tendency to do that. I've got this theory that people sit there and suffer through the hour or so of the episode just to listen to the 5 minutes of drivel at the end.
Yeah, pretty much. I reckon one day someone's going to cut out the last 10 minutes of each of our podcasts and just, have it as a monument to, mental illnesses and stuff.
That's something I'll probably end up doing.
Might be our best episode ever, right?
Yeah,
just
a compilation of our greatest hits. It'll just be all of these bits at the end. Oh, fantastic! Alrighty, well, check out our Facebook page. We'll have our Twitter account up sometime soon with any luck. That will be at Virgo and Freak. We'll also have. We're working actually also to try and get the podcast possibly even onto YouTube. Oh, God, we're trying to put it everywhere. You won't be able to move without seeing it.
That's what she said too.
Not to me, she didn't. You can send us an email if you want to get in touch with us, podcast@leaguefreak.com. Catch us on Twitter, @leaguefreak, @AndrewRLP. And, Any other final words, mate?
No, it's a good episode. I'm glad we did this one. This one's in the bag, in the can, and on to new subjects.
Absolutely. This is a bit longer too, so that's good too. Okay, we'll catch you later. See ya.